The early morning air was crisp, the sky painted in soft hues of orange and pink. A quiet suburban street lay undisturbed, the occasional hum of passing cars breaking the silence. James Carter, a black elderly man in his late 70s, moved steadily with his cane, his worn-out Vietnam War jacket hanging loosely over his shoulders. He had lived in this neighborhood for decades, yet every morning it felt like a new battle. He stepped into a small coffee shop, greeted the cashier with a warm nod, and exchanged a few words before collecting his order. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the air as he walked out, enjoying the rare moment of peace. That peace, however, didn't last long. A police cruiser pulled up sharply beside him, tires screeching against the pavement. Two white officers, Officer Ryan Briggs and Officer Mark Evans, stepped out. Briggs, tall and broad-shouldered, carried an unmistakable air of arrogance, while Evans lingered a step behind, eyes darting nervously. Their gazes locked onto James with a look that was all too familiar. James Carter had fought wars, but this was one battle he never expected to fight, against the very people sworn to protect him, and they had no idea who they were messing with. The morning air was still cool as James Carter strolled down the familiar sidewalks of his neighborhood. His old war medals, pinned proudly on his faded jacket, glistened faintly under the sun. Every step he took was steady despite his age, his cane tapping against the pavement in a slow, rhythmic beat. He had lived here for decades, seen the neighborhood change, watched children grow into adults, and had always believed that he belonged here. That belief shattered the moment the police cruiser screeched to a halt in front of him. The tires burned against the asphalt, leaving behind faint black streaks. The door swung open aggressively, and out stepped Officer Ryan Briggs, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a smirk that reeked of arrogance. His partner, Officer Mark Evans, followed closely, his expression unreadable, yet his silence spoke volumes. Briggs took his time scanning James, his gaze lingering on the war medals before scoffing. "Hey, old man, you lost? This ain't your neighborhood," Briggs said, his voice laced with mockery. James stopped, his grip on his cane tightening slightly. He had been through far worse in life than a smug officer with a superiority complex. He exhaled calmly and met Briggs's gaze with quiet confidence. "I have lived here for over 40 years, he stated, his tone even, yet firm. Briggs chuckled, shaking his head before stepping closer, invading James's personal space. He towered over him, eyes filled with condescension. "Yeah? Well, you do not look like you belong," Briggs muttered, his hand resting on his belt, right next to his holster. Behind him, Evans shifted uncomfortably, his hands clasped behind his back, but he remained silent. He had no intention of stopping this. James didn't flinch. He had faced far worse than a bully with a badge, but he knew exactly where this was going. The moment James took a step forward to leave, Briggs reached out and yanked the cane from his grip. The sudden force sent James stumbling backward, struggling to keep his balance. A few bystanders nearby froze in their tracks, eyes darting toward the scene, but no one dared to step in. Briggs spun the cane in his hand like it was a toy, amusement dancing in his eyes. "What kind of soldier are you if you can't even stand?" Briggs mocked, laughing as James steadied himself. Evans took a step back, avoiding eye contact with James. The younger officer knew this was wrong, but he said nothing. His silence made him just as guilty. James swallowed his anger. He had fought wars, seen death, and endured more than these men could ever understand. But this moment of sheer disrespect, this was different. Briggs took it even further. He looked down at James's worn Vietnam War veteran cap, dangling from his pocket. With an exaggerated smirk, he plucked it from him and threw it onto the ground. "Oops," Briggs muttered with fake sympathy, before pressing his boot down on the cap, grinding it into the dirt. James clenched his fists. His breathing was slow, controlled. He refused to give them what they wanted, a reaction. The bystanders whispered among themselves but didn't dare to interfere. Some lowered their heads, walking away as if they hadn't seen anything at all. Briggs smirked, still stepping on the cap. "Guess your country doesn't owe you much after all, huh?" James lifted his gaze, his expression unreadable, but the fire in his eyes was undeniable. "You have no idea what you just did," James said, his voice eerily calm. Briggs narrowed his eyes. He had expected anger, fear, something, but James Carter remained unwavering. That unsettled him, even if he wouldn't admit it. Evans shifted uneasily again. The atmosphere had changed, and he could feel it. But Briggs didn't care. With one last stomp on the cap, he turned back to James. "You are under arrest," he declared. James didn't resist as Briggs grabbed his arm and forcefully turned him toward the police car. He remained silent, his face unreadable as his cheek was pressed against the cold metal of the hood. "And then," he whispered, just loud enough for Briggs to hear, "you just made the biggest mistake of your life." The ride to the station was silent. James sat in the back, hands cuffed, his posture still dignified despite the situation. Briggs occasionally glanced at him through the rearview mirror, still smirking, convinced he had just put an unruly old man in his place. At the precinct, James was placed in a small, dimly lit holding cell. A few officers glanced his way, but no one seemed particularly concerned. To them, he was just another nobody. A few minutes later, a guard approached the cell, holding out a phone. "You get one call," the guard muttered. James took the phone, his fingers steady as he dialed a number he hadn't called in years. It rang twice before a deep, commanding voice answered. "Dad? What happened?" James closed his eyes for a brief moment before speaking. His voice was calm, deliberate. "It is time." There was silence on the other end. A chilling, heavy silence. Then finally the voice spoke again, this time carrying a sharp edge. "I am on my way." The line went dead. James handed the phone back to the guard, then sat back on the bench. His face remained composed, but a small, knowing smile formed at the corner of his lips. The reckoning had begun. The atmosphere inside the precinct shifts, an unspoken tension creeping into the air. The hum of casual conversations among officers suddenly dies, as a deep, guttural roar from high-performance engines echoes outside. A convoy of unmarked black SUVs skids to a halt, their heavily tinted windows concealing the occupants within. Officers at their desks exchange uneasy glances. The kind of people who arrived like this were never friendly. The doors swing open simultaneously, and from the first vehicle, a man steps out. Nathan Carter. He is not just any man. He is a walking storm. His imposing figure, clad in all black, exudes calculated authority. Every step he takes is controlled, measured, predatory. A scar runs along his jawline, a testament to battles fought and won. His boots strike the pavement with precision, and as he strides toward the entrance, the precinct doors practically tremble under the force of his presence. Inside, officers stiffen, their easygoing demeanor replaced with unease. Nathan's gaze sweeps across the room, his cold, calculating eyes scanning the officers, looking for one thing. "Where is my father?" His voice isn't raised. It doesn't need to be. The front desk officer, a younger cop, stares, frozen like a deer in headlights. His throat bobs as he swallows, fingers twitching over his keyboard as if searching for an excuse. He doesn't dare speak. Nathan takes one slow step forward. "I won't ask again." The police chief, an older, heavy-set man, finally steps forward, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. Mr. Carter, there must be some misunderstanding. Your father was just—" Nathan doesn't look at him. He only asks again, voice sharp as a blade. "Where is he?" The front desk officer stammers. He's in holding cell B, down the hall." Nathan doesn't waste another second. He moves, pushing past officers who scramble out of his way like falling dominoes. The storm has arrived. The holding cell is dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of sweat and stale coffee. Inside, James Carter sits upright, unshaken, his old soldier's posture intact. He does not look like a broken man. He looks like a man who has been waiting. The clinking sound of boots echoes as Nathan steps in. The moment their eyes meet, the shift is undeniable. Nathan's gaze sweeps over his father, noting the tight handcuffs, the faint bruising along his wrist, the exhaustion hidden beneath his composed expression. His jaw clenches. "Who put their hands on you?" James exhales slowly, glancing past Nathan's shoulder. Outside the cell, standing near the desks, Ryan Briggs watches. The confidence that once dripped from his stance is gone. His cocky smirk replaced by the kind of pale, gut-clenching fear only a man who knows he's done something unforgivable feels. James lifts his chin slightly, locking eyes with his son before nodding toward Briggs, the one with the smirk. Nathan follows his father's gaze, his expression unreadable, but the weight of his stare alone makes Briggs take a step back. Silence stretches. Nathan doesn't speak at first. He simply tilts his head, studying the man who dared to lay hands on his father. Briggs forces a chuckle. trying to mask the dread settling in his bones. I didn't know he was. Nathan takes a step forward, his movements eerily controlled. You didn't need to know. Briggs opens his mouth again, but nothing comes out. Nathan keeps walking, step by step, closing the distance, until he is standing directly in front of him, close enough for Briggs to feel the slow, even breath of a man who has seen worse monsters than him and put them down without blinking. Briggs swallows hard. You humiliated my father. Nathan's voice is barely above a whisper, but somehow, it's the loudest thing in the room. Briggs shifts on his feet, attempting to salvage his authority. Look, I was just doing my job. It was... You want to talk about procedure? Nathan interrupts, pulling out his phone with a slow, practiced motion. One tap, one call. The phone rings once before it's answered. Nathan speaks, voice cold as steel. Send internal affairs. Now. The precinct doors swing open again, but this time, the men walking in are not police. They are internal affairs. Dressed in sharp suits, their presence alone is enough to send a ripple of unease through the station. Officers who once stood tall now shift uncomfortably, their casual arrogance replaced with silent panic. The lead agent, a stone-faced man with calculating eyes, surveys the room before turning to the police chief. We received a direct call regarding misconduct and abuse of power. The station is deathly silent. Briggs stares, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Wait, what? You can't just... Nathan turns his gaze back to him, unimpressed. Arrest him. Briggs flinches. No. This is a mistake. I'm a cop. The internal affairs agents don't flinch. One of them steps forward, reaching for his cuffs. Officer Ryan Briggs, you are under arrest for unlawful detainment, abuse of power, and violation of civil rights. Briggs thrashes violently, but it's no use. This is insane. I was just following protocol. Nathan doesn't react. He doesn't need to. Evans, the silent partner in crime, finally speaks up, his voice shaky. I didn't do anything. Nathan's sharp gaze flickers toward him. And that's exactly why you're being arrested too. Evans's face twists in disbelief. Wait, hold on. Handcuffs snap around his wrists before he can protest further. Briggs continues to struggle, his breath coming in erratic bursts. I'm a cop. Nathan finally takes one last step forward. Not anymore. Briggs slumps, his strength draining from his body. Evans, now pale and defeated, hangs his head. As they're dragged out of the station, their boots scraping against the floor, James Carter finally stands. The war may have been fought differently this time, but justice was served nonetheless. Nathan exhales, stepping aside as his father walks forward. No words are spoken between them. None are needed. Nathan places a firm hand on James's shoulder, and together, they walk out. Inside the police station, an unsettling silence fills the air. Officers shuffle uncomfortably at their desks, their usual authority replaced with nervous glances toward the glass-walled conference room where internal affairs agents sit, reviewing footage. At the center of it all sits Officer Ryan Briggs, his jaw clenched, hands gripping the edge of his chair. His arrogance has faded, replaced by quiet unease. Beside him, Officer Mark Evans shifts in his seat, his fingers tapping anxiously against the table. Unlike Briggs, Evans understands what is coming. Across the table, the lead investigator, Agent Collins, watches the two officers with an expression of cold disapproval. His fingers drum against the case file before him. This, Collins finally says, sliding a folder toward Briggs, is a disgrace. Briggs scoffs, his voice forced and defensive. We followed protocol. The guy looked suspicious. Nathan Carter, standing in the corner, steps forward. His presence alone shifts the energy in the room. His cold, calculating gaze locks onto Briggs, making the officer shrink in his seat. Suspicious? Nathan's voice is dangerously quiet. A 78-year-old man, a veteran, walking home. That's what you call suspicious? Briggs shifts uncomfortably, but refuses to back down. He resisted. Nathan exhales sharply, his jaw tightening. You humiliated my father. You threw him against a car. You stomped on his war medals. You laughed in his face. His voice is slow, deliberate. Tell me, Briggs, was that protocol? The room remains silent. Even the other officers are too ashamed to look at their colleague. Agent Collins clears his throat and looks directly at Briggs. Officer Briggs, as of this moment, you are relieved of duty. Your employment with this department is terminated, effective immediately. Furthermore, you are under arrest for excessive force, unlawful detainment, and official misconduct. Briggs jolts in his seat, his eyes widening. You can't do this. Collins simply nods at two uniformed officers standing by the door. They step forward, gripping Briggs' arms. The sound of handcuffs clicking around his wrists echoes in the silent room. Briggs' panicked gaze darts toward Evans. Say something, man. Evans, who had remained silent this entire time, finally speaks. I should have stopped it, he murmurs, his voice heavy with regret. Collins turns to him next. Officer Evans, your failure to intervene in an unlawful arrest makes you complicit. You are hereby suspended without pay, pending further investigation. Evans nods stiffly. He knows he is lucky to not be in handcuffs himself. Briggs, still struggling, glares at Nathan. You think you've won? Nathan steps closer, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. You don't have a job anymore. You don't have power anymore. And trust me, he leans in. If you ever lay a hand on my father again, losing your job will be the least of your problems. Briggs swallows hard, looking away. Nathan steps back, watching as Briggs is dragged out of the station. His humiliation is complete. Justice has been served. As James and Nathan step outside the police station, they are met with an unexpected sight. A crowd has gathered. Neighbors, bystanders, even people who had once looked the other way. Some hold signs of support. Others simply stand in quiet acknowledgement. The same people who had ignored James before now see him. The air is thick with murmurs, whispers of what had just happened inside. Some people had been afraid to speak up before. Now they feel ashamed. A young black father stands at the front, his son gripping his hand tightly. A woman who had once hesitated steps forward, her face full of regret. A man, one of the same bystanders who had stayed silent, finally speaks. I should have done something, he says, his voice raw. I should have spoken up. James studies him for a long moment before responding, his voice steady. Next time, do. The crowd absorbs his words, the weight of them settling deep. Nathan stands beside his father, watching as people approach to shake James's hand, offering apologies, gratitude, and newfound respect. A journalist pushes through, holding a microphone. Mr. Carter, do you have anything you'd like to say to the officers who did this to you? James pauses. The cameras are rolling. The world is watching. For years, he had been invisible, forgotten. But tonight, James Carter has the world's attention. He straightens his back, his voice calm but commanding. I fought for this country. I bled for this country. But some people still see me as a threat in my own neighborhood. He scans the crowd. That's not just my story. It's the story of too many people who stay silent because they think no one will listen. The reporters lean in, capturing every word. But today, James continues, someone listened. He glances at his son. And someone fought back. The crowd erupts in applause. Nathan, standing tall beside his father, nods. The world may have forgotten who you are, Dad. But I never will. James looks at his son, emotion flickering across his face. Nathan raises his hand in a sharp salute, a soldier's tribute to another. But this is not just about military honor. It is about something deeper. A son's respect for his father. James, his voice strong despite the emotions threatening to surface, returns the salute. The world had tried to erase him, but tonight, James Carter had won. Nathan and James stand before a grand military memorial, its stone surface engraved with the names of fallen soldiers. The evening sky casts an orange glow, the soft wind rustling the nearby flags. The air is thick with history, sacrifice, and unspoken stories of men who had given everything for a country that often forgot them. James runs his fingers over the cool stone, tracing the names of comrades lost in battle. These were men he had fought beside, men who had bled for the same flag that had been used to justify his humiliation just days ago. Nathan watches his father in silence, his sharp military posture softening. He sees more than just an old man. He sees a warrior, a survivor, a man who had carried burdens no one should have to. James exhales, his voice low but firm. I didn't fight for a country that would turn its back on me. He pauses, shaking his head. But I fought for the men who stood beside me, and I'd do it again. Nathan nods. And when they disrespected you, they disrespected all of them. He gestures toward the memorial. That's why I had to act. A few bystanders nearby listen quietly, their eyes flicking between the two men. They recognize James now, not as just another elderly black man, but as someone who had earned his place, who had built the very freedom so many took for granted. A young soldier in uniform hesitates before stepping forward. He stands at attention and salutes James, his voice steady. "Sir, I just wanted to say, we see you. We respect you." James blinks, taken aback. Slowly, he lifts his hand and returns the salute. The moment is heavy, profound. A journalist lingers, scribbling down notes, her voice soft when she finally speaks. "Mr. Carter, what would you say to those officers if you could?" James doesn't hesitate. He looks directly at the camera, his expression unreadable. "They thought they could break a soldier." His voice is calm, unwavering. But when his son came knocking, justice was served. And the message was clear. Never underestimate those who paved the way before you. The journalist nods, knowing she has just captured history. Nathan places a hand on his father's shoulder. James gives him a small nod of gratitude. As they walk away from the memorial, the world finally sees James Carter for who he truly is. Not just a man who fought wars, but a man who fought for his dignity, his respect, and his legacy. And this time, he won.